A man sits down for a podcast interview, hour and 15 minutes. Camera's on the whole time. And at the very end, the host, a gay man, says, look, after all of that, I think you are homophobic, transphobic, and sexist. Why should I think anything different? And the guy he's interviewing doesn't get angry, doesn't storm out. He simply agrees, cheerfully. He says that by the standards of the sexual revolution, yeah. And then he adds, direct quote, "You've never met anyone worse." And that would be fine if he were just some fringe idiot out there that we could write off. But that man has led worship services in the Pentagon, where the Secretary of Defense put a hand on his shoulder. And I've told you about Doug Wilson before, who looks like a cartoon biscuit that got caught in a rainstorm. And old Doug runs Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho, and he's described as Pete Hegseth's spiritual advisor. And he just gave his first ever interview to an LGBTQ outlet called Uncloseted Media. And really, after this, you should go watch the whole thing. I'll drop the link in the description. Go watch it and support their page. And that interviewer asks Doug Wilson whether in his ideal world, the maximum penalty for homosexual behavior would be execution. And Doug Wilson says, yeah.
And do you believe that still, that in your eyes, the maximum penalty for homosexual behavior in an ideal world, in Pastor Wilson's ideal world, would be execution?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. If you ask me, could you ever envision a homosexual crime of any nature being visited with the death penalty? Yes, I could. And I'm a pastor to people whose sexual temptations are homosexual.
So obviously the interviewer is taken back by that. So he asked again, and Wilson says, quote, yes, I could. And this is something Wilson's researched and obsessed about. And he walked that interviewer through a 1980s debate among a group called the Christian Reconstructionists. And they were arguing about whether the Old Testament requires you to execute gay people. And Wilson's position in that debate was that execution should be the maximum penalty, not the minimum one. In this story, the one he's telling, Doug Wilson was the voice of restraint at a conference about killing people over who they loved. And he volunteered that story, bragged even. And the reason that this is a Pentagon story and not a strange little church story is what he said next. He was asked, how many people in this administration, the Trump administration, share his ideology? And he said between 10 and 20. Now, he was asked who they were, and he said, quote, I'd rather not say because I don't want to ruin their day.
In our D.C. church service, there are a number of people that are either working for the government, they're assigned to the Pentagon, or they have roles in the administration. Yeah.
More than 10, more than 20? Roughly how many would you say?
I would say, I would say between 10 and 20.
Wow, in the actual administration?
I would say between 10 and 20 in the government.
In the government, got it. And who else in addition to Hegseth would be part of that?
Sure. No major players at cabinet level or anything like that. And as for the people who are the next tier or 2 tiers down from that, I'd rather not say because I don't want to ruin their day.
You think it would ruin their day if you said who they are?
Yeah, basically.
Ruin their day. People who share an ideology about killing people for who they love. He effing told a gay man that there are as many as 20 people running your American government who think executing gay men should be legally available. And your reason for not naming them is that it would be awkward for them at work. He also doesn't believe that married women should have the right to vote. And when he was asked what happens when a wife wants to go to medical school and her husband doesn't agree, he says she stays home because the woman submits. On women serving aboard submarines, he says, why shouldn't I throw catnip into the pack of cats? That's right, women, you're nothing more than catnip. And sailors are cats. And this part's sick. It's absolutely sick. And before I go any further, if you're in a situation where you've been sexually assaulted, visit RAINN.org, RAIN with 2 N's.org, or call the domestic violence hotline. They are at thehotline.org or 800-799-7233. But Doug Wilson was asked about a husband forcing himself on his wife. He said in a violent situation, you call the police. But he described a second category, where a woman says no and the man does it anyway. And Wilson says, in that situation, there was no crime. Church discipline, sure, but not police. He also said a wife doesn't have the right to refuse her husband for 6 months, and asked what happens if a man forces his wife in that 6 month. He says neither is justified, that both are sinning, and that the goal of counseling, church counseling, is to get them back to, quote, having sexual relations the way a normal couple would. Reconciliation, power with the criminal, set by the church. I've got to throw in that his church has also faced sexual abuse allegations going back a decade, which he denies. I've got to say that part too. And down in the comments, I want a serious answer to something. What would you actually say to your senator about who is being invited to lead worship inside our Pentagon? Not whether or not they would listen, but what would you say if you had your senator sitting right there? Because Doug Wilson, he's not going to stop. He wants Obergefell overturned, marriage equality, and he doesn't think it's a fantasy. He said it might take as few as 2 Supreme Court justices, and that the next confirmation hearings will be about marriage equality instead of abortion. And then he said the quiet part out loud. He said that he's not plotting with administration officials, but he is, quote, read by people in powerful places, end quote. And look, there's a version of this country where a fringe pastor in Idaho believes whatever the hell he wants to believe, and none of us have to care. He's just a crazy man out there spewing hate. That's the First Amendment at work. But this man's ideas, they have a home in the Department of Defense, and a home in our government. And Doug Wilson told you, in his own words, that you have never met anybody worse. And you know what? We have to believe him, because he is the only person in this story that's being completely honest about who the hell he is. And that interview, by the way, exists because a small nonprofit newsroom sat in a chair across from someone for an hour and 15 minutes, across from someone purely evil. And they asked follow-ups that no one else would ask. An independent media like that, and like us, we live on your interactions. A like, a comment, a share. Do that here and do that for them. Go watch that story.